Peace and blessings. How's everyone this evening? Welcome to the Right Authority Podcast. I am your host, Carlos Carr Sr.
The first revolution is when you change your mind about how you look at things and see that there might be another way to look at it that you have not been shown.
Thank you for tuning in. And all right, where's my mute? There we go. I hear you now. Again, welcome to the Right Authority Podcast. I am your host, Carlos Carr Sr., also known as DKCOG. Why am I here? We're building an intelligent agenda to empower African and indigenous people living in America toward political control and freedom of their communities. In short, the purpose is to dismantle white supremacy. If you do not understand white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything and anything you understand will only confuse you. That is a quote from Neely Fuller Jr. And we're going to kick things off today with It's time for an OG Minute. I will not spend much time on this, but I have to chime in on the Will Smith at the Oscars. I do not recognize celebrity culture myself because I see it as destructive. Living your life through a celebrity is the equivalent to living in a fantasy world detached from reality. You follow what they say, who they date, what they eat, what they wear, and even how they raise their children. You follow every aspect of celebrity culture. The thing that I'm going to speak on here, most people may agree or disagree with. I know there's a lot of that going on, particularly on social media. But you have to understand that for those who follow Will and Jada, you know they are living a really messed up lifestyle. They have something that they call an open marriage, which means that either spouse can actually go out and have sex with whoever they like. Well, there's a problem with an open marriage. It defiles your sacred oath that you took to love, to cherish, and to pledge your faithfulness to each other. The other thing you have to look at about the Smiths is their children. If you haven't been paying attention, it seems like their children are going through some type of identity crisis, where this open marriage thing that they present, and if you, again, follow Will and Jada, they both say that they genderly switch roles with male-female roles. And this, I have to say, has caused some problems that I believe manifested during the Academy Awards. And I want people to be clear here. When I saw, and I did not watch the Academy Awards like most folks, I believe it's BS. Don't waste my time with it. Could care less about it. But when you wake up the next day and the headlines is Will Smith slapping Chris Rock because of a inappropriate joke, you may say, or an insensitive joke, you may say, it forced you to take notice of what's going on. Now, when I first saw it, I'm going to be honest with you, I thought to myself, well, that was a bitch-ass move. Now, why did I say that? It's because you're at the Academy Awards, Will. It's just being broadcast around the world. They said they had an audience of 50 million people. And you mean to tell me you picked this particular time to stand up and be a man to your woman? What did I say about open marriages? It destroys that sacred oath that you have between you, her, and God. And Will has to understand that their behavior has led up to this moment. Now, I also heard and seen some people saying that Will was having a spiritual awakening. Well, I'm here to testify that a spiritual awakening is a very private thing. It is something that takes place in your mind and your soul, and it changes you and your bad or inappropriate behavior from within. It's not someone on the outside who drives this spiritual awakening. Now, someone on the outside may have pointed out your behavior that made you start the process, but it's not hearing an insensitive joke and walking up on stage and slapping someone. That is not a spiritual awakening. A spiritual awakening is humbling. It brings you to your knees in guilt and shame about your behavior. So when I hear people say this, I'm wondering about their spirituality, for real, or lack of. Being my age and being a student of Malcolm X, I understand that people evolve. You may think and do things one way, and then something comes along that opens your eyes that maybe this is not the correct way to do that. And you evolve. Now, most human beings will go through this process, and like I said, being a student of Malcolm X and saw the way that he evolved in each stage of his life led me to understand that I have to do the same in my life. And so a spiritual awakening did happen within me that caused me to change my bad and inappropriate behavior. That spiritual awakening brought me closer in my relationship with my family, with my wife. So I understand the intent that this was a spiritual awakening starting to come in for Will. But let me point out one more thing. And like I said, I wasn't going to spend too much time on this. It's just that when I heard the spiritual awakening thing, I just couldn't buy that because of their lifestyle, the way that they live. So at this point, we now have seen the fall of Will Smith. And just like Bill Cosby, we must now allow them to fade out of our consciousness. Will Smith said that Denzel told him to be careful because at the height of your success, the devil will come for you. Well, Denzel, I think you told Will a little too late. I'm going to share a video with you guys on celebrity culture from Chris Hedges. And if you don't know who Chris Hedges is, I do challenge you to go and look him up. Okay? But I do want you to check this out. And it's called The Cult of Self. It's about 4.5 minutes. Stay with me on this. Check it out.
When you spend your life as a celebrity, you have no idea who you are.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. This is your brother Eddie from the Dean Show, and I have some amazing news for you. We just made a down payment.
And yet we measure our lives by these celebrities. We seek to be like them.
Oh my God, thank you so much.
We emulate their look and behavior. We escape the messiness of real life through the fantasy of their stardom. We too long to attract admiring audiences for our grand, ongoing life movie. We try to see ourselves moving through our life as a camera would see us, mindful of how we hold ourselves, how we dress, what we say. We have learned ways of speaking and thinking that grossly disfigure the way we relate to the world and those around us. The fantasy of celebrity culture is not designed simply to entertain. It is designed to drain us emotionally, confuse us about our identity, blame ourselves for our predicament, condition us to chase illusions of impossible fame and happiness.
No, just like Justin, please! Justin, you can't! Justin, please! Justin, please!
And keep us from fighting back. There were 12 million cosmetic plastic surgery procedures performed last year in the United States. They were performed because in America, most human beings, rich and poor, famous and obscure, have been conditioned to view themselves as marketable commodities. They are objects. Like consumer products, they have no intrinsic value. They must look fabulous and live on fabulous sets. They must remain young. They must achieve notoriety and money, or the illusion of it, to be a success, and it does not matter how they get there. The cult of the self dominates our culture. This cult has within it the classic traits of psychopaths: superficial charm, grandiosity and self-importance, a need for constant stimulation, a penchant for lying, deception, and manipulation, and the incapacity for remorse or guilt. And this is also the ethic of unfettered capitalism. It is the misguided belief that personal style and personal advancement, mistaken for individualism, are the same as democratic equality. It is the celebration of image over substance. We have a right in the cult of the self to get whatever we desire. But the tantalizing illusions offered by our consumer culture are vanishing as we head towards collapse. The jobs we are shedding are not coming back. The belief that democracy lies in the choice between competing brands and the freedom to accumulate vast sums of personal wealth at the expense of others has been exposed as a fraud.
I hope you enjoyed that little segment from Chris Hedges, The Cult of the Self, because that's exactly where our society is right now. And for all those that chimed in on Will Smith on social media, you can tell that's exactly where we are as a society, that we idolize the rich and famous. We all strive to be rich and famous. We all want to look like the rich and famous. And don't get me wrong, at one time in my life, I had the same mindset. But as I said, you find information, or information comes to you that make you want to take a different look at what you're doing. And at that point, you decide to make a change. You evolve. Too many of us do not understand the harm of celebrity culture. Look at what it has done to our young women, trying to be like Beyonce, Nicki Minaj, and Cardi B, and all these other celebrities that have no moral compass. And why we fall for the things that they say is beyond me. As far as I'm concerned, a celebrity can only tell me about their particular craft. Okay? So if I am an aspiring actor, then yes, I will listen to what Denzel says about acting. Okay? If I am an aspiring musician or entertainer, I will listen to what a entertainer or musician will say about their craft. If I want to play professional sports, I will listen to a professional football player, a professional basketball player, a professional soccer player, tennis player, or hockey player about their sport and how they were able to get to their level. Anything else coming out of their mouth is irrelevant. We do have something called parents. And while I'm on parents, I want you guys to go into your children's room, especially if you have middle school children to high school children in the home. Go into their room and look what is on the walls. And if you don't see a picture of you and your spouse on the wall of your children's room, it's time to have a talk with your children. It's time to bring them to the reality as to who they should be given praise to. And you need to have a talk about false idols. At one time, I went into my son's room and I saw all these pictures of Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, some baseball players. I believe at the time Reggie Jackson was one of the hot baseball players. And it dawned on me that there was no picture of myself and my wife in their room. Now, why is this important? Because what your children are doing is telling you who they look up to. That's what they're telling you. So I had to snatch all the stuff off the wall, and I gave my son a picture of my wife and I said, we are the ones who brought you into the world. We are the ones that have taken care of you when you're sick. We're the ones who take care of you. When you fall and get a boo-boo, we're the one that shows the love and try to patch up that injury. We're the one that buys your clothes, that feeds you, that gets you off to school, help you with your homework. We're the ones that correct your bad behavior when you're young. So if any praise is going to be given to anyone, it should start with your parents. That is very important. Again, the child should not be honoring anyone above their caretaker, their parents, grandparents, whoever is taking care of that child. That person should be honored first and foremost. And with that, I'm going to wrap up my OG minute, and we're going to move on to the recap. For those that have seen some of my videos and have been following what I have been broadcasting, especially in the realm of brainwashing and mind control, I have been trying to show, I'm gonna walk that one back. I have shown you through my videos how brainwashing came about, what it is, how it works, and who is behind it. So I'm going to do a quick recap because I'm going to start to wrap up the series on brainwashing. And we're going to start the recap by the first thing I did with Yuri Bezmenov and how to brainwash a nation in 4 steps. Those 4 steps being demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. Now, demoralization takes a generation to complete, about 30 years, okay? And in the interview with Bezmenov, that interview was actually done in 1985, and he stated that the process had already been completed in the United States, which means if you go back 30 years, that'll take you into the 1950s. And if you are not familiar, that is when we had Brown versus the Board of Education in Kansas, or Topeka, Kansas, if I remember correctly. And the Supreme Court, at that point, desegregated the schools. Now, most of us thought that was a great move. But hindsight is 2020. We now know that when we desegregated the schools, that we were then indoctrinated with a system within the education system of white supremacy. Everything from the Pledge of Allegiance to their history, their social studies, their civic classes, everything. The only thing black and brown people were taught in this country, and indigenous people, was that we were slaves, we were savages, and we took y'all's land. Everything else was an indoctrination of white supremacy. Now, looking back, we can literally see that. We also heard from Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt, who was a former senior policy advisor for the Office of Educational Research and Improvement, known as OERI, with the U.S. Department of Education. She's also a freelance writer. Her father admitted to being in Skull and Bones on his deathbed and gave her the Skull and Bones membership book to prove it. Iserbyt authored a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Say what? Come on now.
Say what?
One more time. She wrote a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Now, do keep in mind, she was the senior policy advisor for the Office of Educational Research and Improvement in the U.S. Department of Education under the Reagan administration. And she writes a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. I think that's something we should pay attention to. Later on here, I'm going to set up another clip, and I'm going to play that for you, which is from one of my least favorite historians, Thomas Sowell. And the clip is going to show you how schools are dumbing down young students and creating what is called artificial stupidity. And for those of you who have Generation Y or Gen Y, I have, those are my grandchildren, Gen Y. And I have a total of 11 grandchildren, in which they range in age now from 25 years of age down to 8 years of age. And I'm here to tell you that is one dumb generation. Okay? It's like, I don't even know the purpose of them going to school. So why don't you give me a moment? I'll set that clip up and I'll go ahead and get that going for you. I should have had that ready for you, but unfortunately I did not. So as I'm going in to grab that, just give me a moment and stay with me. Just about there, folks. I do apologize. Like I said, normally I would have had this set up for you, but I kind of jumped into this at the last minute, so do forgive me. I wanted to just go ahead and get this out. It's a short video that's about
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. This is your brother Eddie from the D Show.
About 3 minutes, 3 minutes and some change.
And are in contract to purchase this 30.
People are all born ignorant.
I'm going to bring that up for you right now. And here you go. Artificial stupidity created by schools. And again, this is Thomas Sowell.
But they are not born stupid. Much of the stupidity we see today is induced by our educational system, from the elementary schools to the universities. In a high-tech age that has seen the creation of artificial intelligence by computers, we are also seeing the creation of artificial stupidity by people who call themselves educators. Educational institutions created to pass on to the next generation the knowledge, experience, and culture of the generations that went before them have instead been turned into indoctrination centers to promote whatever notions, fashions, or ideologies happen to be in vogue among today's intelligentsia. Many conservatives have protested against the specifics of the things with which students are being indoctrinated. But that is not where the most lasting harm is done. Many, if not most, of the leading conservatives of our times were on the left in their youth. These have included Milton Friedman, Ronald Reagan, and the whole neoconservative movement. The experiences of life can help people outgrow whatever they were indoctrinated with. What may persist, however, is the lazy habit of hearing one side of an issue and being galvanized into action without hearing the other side, and more fundamentally, not having developed any mental skills that would enable you to systematically test one set of beliefs against another. It was once the proud declaration of many educators that we are here to teach you how to think, not what to think. But far too many of our teachers and professors today are teaching their students what to think, about everything from global warming to the new trinity of race, class, and gender. Even if all the conclusions with which they indoctrinate their students were 100% correct, that would still not be equipping students with the mental skills to weigh opposing views for themselves in order to be prepared for new and unforeseeable issues that will arise over their lifetimes after they leave the schools and colleges. Many of today's educators not only supply students with conclusions, they promote the idea that students should spring into action because of these pre-packaged conclusions. In other words, vent their feelings and go galloping off on crusades, without either a knowledge of what is said by those on the other side or the intellectual discipline to know how to analyze opposing arguments. When we see children in elementary schools out carrying signs and demonstrations, we are seeing the kind of mindless groupthink that causes adults to sign petitions they don't understand, or, worse yet, follow leaders they don't understand, whether to the White House, the Kremlin, or Jonestown. A philosopher once said that the most important knowledge is knowledge of one's own ignorance. That is the knowledge that too many of our schools and colleges are failing to teach our young people. It takes a certain amount of knowledge just to understand the extent of one's own ignorance. But our educators have given assignments to children not yet a decade old to write letters to members of Congress or to presidents, spouting off on issues ranging from nuclear weapons to medical care. Will Rogers once said that it was not ignorance that was so bad, but all the things we know that ain't so. But our classroom indoctrinators are getting students to think that they know after hearing only one side of an issue. It is artificial stupidity.
So the fun thing with the serpent is
artificial stupidity is what we're dealing with in our society. And if you have been with me along the way, especially when we got to QAnon and the evangelical right, you can clearly see it. But the next step in the process that Bezmenov talked about was destabilization. Now, keep in mind, demoralization is a process that once it is completed, you cannot change the person's mind that has gone through the demoralization stage, because they believe what they believe. And just like you heard in the artificial stupidity, they do not have the capacity to reason and try to learn more information about the opposing view. They stick with the information they were given and they run with it. Okay? Take no time out to even understand the opposing view, or if what they believe in is the correct ideology. They do no research on it whatsoever. They just follow it. Now, with destabilization, that was a process that Bezmenov said that he was surprised how quickly it had happened. In fact, he could see it clearly happening in politics, our economics, and in war. Bezmenov also stated that destabilization, part of that would be used by the social movements that was going on in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in this country. So that caused division within the country, strong division. And that's nothing new in the United States, because white supremacy had always had that division in place for white versus black and brown and indigenous people, as well as women, to tell you the truth. So the social movements of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the war movement against Vietnam, the hippie yippie movement, the civil rights movement, the Black Panthers movement, the sexual revolution movement, the feminist movement, and all of this started the divisions within our society that started our society on a decline. That is called destabilization. Crisis is another area that he said that you could clearly see the fascist fingerprints on, in the area of economy, war, and foreign policy. Now, if you look at the history of this country and its foreign policy, the United States, out of its 250 some odd years of existence, has been at war like 90% of the time it's been a country. I believe when you look it up, and I don't have those notes in front of me right now, there's more than 200 wars that the United States have been in. So their foreign policy is war. The economy and the unfettered capitalism that we live under has pretty much milked the working man and woman, pretty much milked them dry, along with the tech bubble that broke in the early 2000s, the housing bubble that broke in 2007, 2008, as well as the savings and loans ripoff that they did in the 1980s and early 90s. All that was a transfer of wealth from the working class to the ruling class. And all of these things have had an effect on our economy, especially with us being in perpetual war. The Afghanistan war was the longest recorded war that we had been in, and that was 22 years. They have estimated that we have spent up to, depending on where you look, $3 to $8 trillion on that war. And then just recently, you've heard Biden. They've already given $800,000 in military aid and $200,000 in humanitarian aid. And you just recently heard Biden say that he was given another $1 billion in humanitarian aid to the Ukraine. And you have to look as to why would you do that with the vast number of unemployed and unemployable and homeless people that we have in this country today. All of this leads to the third stage of crisis. That's where the United States is overall right now in Bezmenov's plan on how to brainwash a nation in 4 steps. We are in crisis as a nation. For the black community, we are normalized, which is the 4th step. Now, normalized means that pretty much their indoctrination process has been completed. And now everybody believes or not believe in the information that they filled our heads with. Our school system is designed to roll out worker drones. And when I say our school system, I'm talking about the public school system. That's what it's designed to do. You heard so well. And I do have a clip from Charlotte Iserbyt. I'm not going to play it now, but if you go back and you look at How to Brainwash a Nation in 4 Steps, you will see that clip. Again, go to my website, www.therightauthority.com, and look for that How to Brainwash a Nation in 4 Steps. It's in audio form, so you will see that as a podcast. But you will hear the clip there. So, fascism and what you saw on January 6, 2020 is the beginning of fascism coming into play here in the United States through the controls of our government. Then I took you to how brainwashing works with Joe Dimsdale, Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at the University of California, San Diego, and author of the book Dark Persuasion and Autonomy of Malice. And in his book Dark Persuasion, we learned how brainwashing came into being. And the work of Pavlov in the Soviet Union, in the what was then the Soviet Union, and the accidental Pavlov trained dogs, and the training of the dogs was a scientific experiment for him on how to pretty much control people. Well, a flood hit his area and flooded the kennels that his dogs were in. And when the caretaker finally got to his kennels, he had to, because at that point all the kennels were floating in water, and in order to get the dogs out of the kennels and save their lives, he literally had to pull the dogs underwater and back up to bring them out. Well, after they removed all the dogs in this manner and they started observing the dogs again, they noticed that the dog's behavior had been altered. They noticed that the meek, shy dogs were now aggressive, and the aggressive dogs were now meek. And he couldn't figure out, oh, here's the important thing. All the training he had taken the dogs through to that point, the dogs had completely forgot. Well, it was that incident that led Pavlov on a quest to understanding that a traumatic event can create a mental break in his subjects. And this is where brainwashing started, because he started to then experiment and see if he could alter the personality of not only dogs now we're talking about doing this to people. So Pavlov keep in mind, Pavlov was in the USSR. So Stalin heard about his work and approached Pavlov and asked him if he could standardize the USSR's citizenry. In other words, if he could standardize all the people to believe in the indoctrination of communism in the USSR. He wanted everybody to be standardized to that point. He also discovered, Joe Dimsdale also talked about what is called the Stockholm Syndrome, which is the best example he gave was Patty Hearst and the what was it? The Liberation Army, that Symbionese Liberation Army, which kidnapped Patty Hearst, and then kept her, according to what he is telling us, in a closet, pretty much, a dark closet, and kept her isolated there for some period of time, to the point to where she started to, and of course her kidnappers will do things like treat her very, very kindly and then flip it and treat her very, very badly. And this went on for a while, to where sooner or later Patty Hearst started to identify and believe in her captives. And so at that point, that's where Patty Hearst is seen with the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA, robbing the bank. And she had to, once they were caught, she had to go on trial for that bank robbery, and was found guilty by the courts. But of course, her family was able to pull some strings and pretty much get her out. He also talked about the Heaven's Gate cult. If you don't remember that, in around the early 2000s, and the comet Hale-Bopp. These people believed that if they killed themselves while the Hale-Bopp comet was passing Earth, that they will ascend to the mothership at the end of the comet. And they did. They all committed suicide in order to do this. And so Joe Dimsdale pretty much covers that and shows you how brainwashing came about and how it was used. Dimsdale also gave a very grim warning about social media, particularly how we would come to properly regulate social media. Because you have a fine line of First Amendment rights that you have to deal with in the regulation of social media, where social media has already figured out a way to allow certain information to come out and how to suppress other informations through their algorithms. And depending on how they set the algorithms, they can allow bad information to come out or misinformation to be seen, while good information is buried and not seen by just anyone. We also looked at Facebook and Instagram. We had a whistleblower, and y'all might remember she testified in Congress, and there is now a settlement that's available for people who feels that their children has been bullied or given inappropriate information or were exposed to inappropriate content, there's a lawsuit. I mean, there was a settlement that was done that you can now go through a lawyer and get paid for this kind of injury to your young people. But the whistleblower clearly identified that Facebook and Instagram was allowing information, especially dealing with eating disorders and bullying, to be seen by young impressionable minds. And they knew that they had these things set in the algorithm that come up on a regular basis. And with young people's attachment to social media, they were constantly being bombarded by this information. And your children, in some ways, were being injured, especially with the bullying that was going on with social media by what they call social media influencers. And so these children will get hooked up on these influencers and try to imitate them. And this, of course, has caused problems. So this is another form, and Dimsdale was very clear that this is another form of brainwashing, because you're in a refined space of you are in a enclosed environment. And he points out that one of the things Pavlov learned, that the dogs learned best when they were in restricted environments, and there was nothing else there to pull their attention. So the same thing works with social media. Your children are in a restricted environment, and the stuff that they're seeing in social media is the stuff that is indoctrinating their minds. Particularly with these social media influencers, as well as inappropriate material that is not appropriate for the child's age. All this came out in the Senate through Facebook, about Facebook and Instagram, and I did do a piece on that. You will look under my brainwashing. I believe it was part 2 of Hacking the American Mind, part 1, 2, and 3. You should check out all 3 of those series, and you'll get that information. And then we took a look at QAnon and the evangelical right, and the fascination with QAnon. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Donald Trump, and a lot of the Trumpers were involved with QAnon. And QAnon was basically an internet-based conspiracy theory about the left being demonic, child abusers, outright evil, stolen elections, all that is part of QAnon. And we also looked, now this is very important stuff. You got to understand the effects of social media and how some of this stuff gets out there. Because again, if you're in a restricted environment, in other words, if you're on Parler all day long, reading stuff being posted by QAnon, you're in a restricted environment, and the information that you are partaking in begins to be ingrained or pretty much set in your head. This is a part of mind control. getting you to believe things that are not true. And QAnon, the majority of the stuff that the man predicted never came true. But people continue to follow him or it or whatever it is. We also looked at the difference, and do keep in mind that Marjorie Taylor Greene is the one that brought critical race theory out to the Republican Party as talking points. And what I am trying to show you guys that Marjorie Taylor Greene is whacked out. I mean, she's so deep into QAnon, she believes a lot of crazy stuff. And then these people believe in Trump as if he is some God, almost to the point. It's crazy how much they believe in Trump, ignoring all of Trump's flaws, all of them. The only thing they believe in is the fact that he recognized QAnon. In fact, some of these idiots believed it was some high-ranking White House official that was Q, the host of QAnon. They actually believed that. And they believed that this high-ranking White House official had a direct line to Trump. And of course, Trump has tweeted out some of the QAnon conspiracies, especially Pizzagate and all the stuff with Hillary Clinton. We looked at how I believe they're doing the old switcheroo on you, and even though they're getting you to all hyped up about critical race theory, what they're really looking for is to bring in critical theory. Now, critical theory is a Marxist ideology that was actually created in Germany at the Frankfurt School prior to World War II. And as the Nazis, the fascists, came into power, they had to move the Frankfurt School out of Germany, and it landed in New York at the Columbia College in New York is where it landed. And critical theory, again, is dealing with Marxism, and pretty much is about bringing in the Marxist ideology here in the United States. Now, one of the things Bezmenov talks about is Marxists, and how Marxists are generally killed by someone who thinks they're more Marxist than the other guy. And it all ends up in one vicious circle, and at the end, none of them prevail. It's what Bezmenov is prophesizing. Then I showed you how they get these things like critical race theory into every state house in the country through a American Legislative Exchange Council, better known as ALEC. And you can look that up at alec.org. And then we took a look at James Stanley, author of How Fascism Works, and America is now in fascism's legal phase. Now, that's a mouthful, but you begin to understand that what they're doing is setting up the American legal system to bring in their fascist ideology. And one of the things that Jason Stanley, if I said James, that's incorrect, Jason Stanley points out is that a lot of what the Republican Party is doing right now is setting it up so a small minority, white folks, neoconservative white folks, can control the politics of this country. Do keep in mind that 2020 census was the first census that showed a decline in the white population. That's major. That is very major. If you're also paid attention to what Biden was talking about here recently, he is opening up the borders to Ukraine refugees. He said that, which means he's allowing white folks into the country. And I just saw it today, an ad that was running against a Republican candidate in the Kansas Senate election, I believe. And they were saying how we had to close the border to illegal immigrants. You hear me? Illegal immigrants. We have to close the border to them, but we can let all these white folks in from the Ukraine. That's racist as hell. There's no other way to look at that. And the thing that most people don't understand is that Mexican border don't mean anything to the people of Mexico because they saw this entire territory as being theirs at one time. Texas was part of Mexico at one time, if you don't remember. You know, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, the lower part of California was all parts of Mexico. Nevada was all part of Mexico at one time. So to close off the border to them is like closing off part of their heritage here in the States. It's like it's crazy. This is not about anything else other than racism. They don't want any more brown people coming into the country, period. But they want more white folks to come in. Let's be real. Biden just talked about it. Just said he will open the borders to Ukrainian refugees. Then the last thing I showed you with that series is the Knights of the Golden Circles, which was a secret organization that may have been connected to the Masons because they had a lot of Masonic symbols and rituals that are very similar to them. And this group wanted to create a 24,000-mile slave state. They wanted to take all the slave states below the Mason-Dixon line, coming off the tip of Florida, the entire Caribbean islands, going all the way down to the top of South America, and then coming back around through Central America and Mexico back up to Texas. They called it the Knights of the Golden Circle. And they wanted that territory to remain slave territories. Now, thank God for all the revolts that happened within the Caribbean that threw off the yoke of the colonials, the colonizers. I'm sorry about that. That threw off the yoke of the colonizers. And do keep in mind, they wanted Havana, Cuba, to be their capital. Think about that. You can look that up. And again, that's the Knights of the Golden Circle. Then we went on to population control with the virus, censorship, and alternative information and treatment of the virus. We didn't get too deep into that, but I do have a series called Do As You're Told. If you want some more information, go to that series. Again, you can find that at on my website, www.therightauthority.com. Go under the video section, and you will find that. And then we went on to the hacking of the American mind with Dr. Robert Lustig from the University of Southern of California, and I believe this is San Diego. I don't know what I put down here, but he was an endocrinologist, and that's a diabetes specialist doctor. And he explored how the industry was contributing to the culture of addiction, depression, and chronic disease. Now, to kind of get you the gist of where this man is coming from, he pretty much told you that the food industry, especially the fast food or junk food industry, has been lying to you. And they have been lying to you to buy their products. And in buying and eating their products, it has made us unhealthy. And he explains how this process worked, but the main focus on that was that he said it was all done through propaganda. And he told us the difference between propaganda and marketing is the truth. So if marketing is not truthful, it's propaganda. And he also pointed out how dopamines, the pleasure principle, from things like sugar, salt, drugs, alcohol, gives us a feeling of euphoria, but it doesn't make us happy because it's serotonin that actually gives you a sense of happiness, where dopamines are temporary. So you kind of get your little blast and you are feeling good, and then you come down and you crash. Where with serotonin, when you reach that level of happiness, that is a constant. It stays with you. And Dr. Lustig brings that out. We also took a look at Edward Bernays and propaganda, the father of public relations, and how propaganda works. And do keep in mind, Edward Bernays is the nephew of Sigmund Freud and a very close nephew of Freud. He took a lot of time talking to his uncle and understanding group psychology. Edward Bernays is the reason why bacon and eggs are eaten here in the United States as a breakfast staple. Edward Bernays is the reason women smoke. Edward Bernays helped with the overthrow of a Democratic elected president, and Edward Bernays was used to develop the propaganda for World War I and II. Fighting for democracy, propaganda, Edward Bernays. And then we looked at latrogenesis. Latrogenesis. Is that even a word? Yes, it's death by doctor. Death by doctor.
Says not compute.
Yes. A Johns Hopkins medical study suggested that medical errors are now the third leading cause of death here in the United States. Then we also looked at how Rockefeller, the medicine men, how Medicine and Capitalism in America by E. Richard Brown, and we also looked at how Rockefeller founded Big Pharma and waged war on natural cures. Now, Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie actually funded a study by a gentleman by the name of Flexner, who actually took the study and went out to every medical school in the United States to gather information for the purpose of standardizing medicine and how medicine was taught in this country. The results of that was the American Medical Association, and every medical school in this country had to be certified by the American Medical Association, or they were taken out. Their university, their school was shut down. They completely destroyed homeopathic practitioners and the use of natural cures. They totally wiped that out. A lot of your grandmother's cures for ailments, through their propaganda, we toss those to the side, and we now go to Big Pharma to buy a pill. And the last thing on this, while we were on that, was the American Cancer Society was also brought into being by the Rockefeller and Carnegie foundations in 1913. The American Cancer Society. And as a cancer survivor myself, that really pisses me off. Then we took a look at Nestle, the most evil business in the world. Nestle is the largest food company in the world, with 60% of their products are not healthy. Nestle was the one in the 1950s that convinced American and Western women that their natural breast milk was not enough for the baby, that they had to give the baby their formula. One more time.
Does not compute.
Does not compute, but we did it. And today you can see that most women prefer to bottle feed a baby, use a formula, versus breastfeeding a baby. Now, that was a lot of information, but that's where we are at this point in what I have presented for you. And I had to do that recap because the next stage coming up, we're going to take you into mass brainwashing, and our subject or topic is going to be the Jonestown Massacre. I will be presenting on that on my next broadcast. So I'm trying to kind of use this broadcast to bring everyone up to speed. So when I present on Jonestown, you see that is connected to all the other material that I have shared with you to this point. Now, most folks, you can believe it or not, but brainwashing is real. It is very real. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up right here. Hopefully everyone followed me on my recap. And most, before I forget, I have to give a shout out to my brother Walter Brooks. We discussed the slap. between us, he gave me some great insight. If you ever heard Walter Brooks or his broadcast of the Brooks Report, you understand Walter has some great insight on things that are happening in this country. And Walter has written a book called Trust No Shadows After Dark, African American Genocide in the United States of America. And just the title alone should give you an idea where Walter is coming from. And I hope to have Walter on soon because Walter and I worked together on internet radio back in the early 2007 to about 2009, 2010. I pretty much produced the Brooks Report for Walter on my community talk radio internet program that I had set up. And it was a pleasure working with Walter, and a lot of material that I read in his book, I realized I heard on his podcast, The Brooks Report. So I think I am very close to the material and understand the material. So I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to sit down with Walter and do this interview with Walter, because I really have some insight on where he's going with his book. So with that, again, my name is Carlos Carr Sr., also known as the KCOG. Look forward to seeing you guys within a week. I had to take a little time off due to some health problems, but I'm back up and going. So hopefully we can keep this thing going if I'm continued to be blessed with my health, and bring you guys up to date on the Jonestown Massacre. Notice I'm saying massacre, because that's exactly what it was. So look forward to that coming up in the near future. With that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Just give me a sec here.
Roger, flight D07, approaching runway 7 Bravo.
I'm going to go ahead and land this thing and get out of here for this evening. You guys have a great evening. Thank you very much for tuning in. Enjoy your night, and I'll see you in a week. Peace out, y'all.